I didn't expect much for my birthday. At my age, you learn not to. But I still hoped for a call. Maybe a little, "Happy birthday, Mom," or "Grandma, we love you." Something small. Something that says, "We remember you." The day started quietly. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock that had been around longer than most of my neighbors. I made myself a cup of coffee, poured it into the same chipped mug I'd used for years, and sat by the window, watching the mailman make his rounds. I kept glancing at my phone on the table beside me. Just in case. Riem. Nothing. No call, no text. I told myself. They're probably busy. My daughter, Susan, always says mornings are crazy with the kids. My son, Robert, he's working long hours now, trying to get that promotion. I reminded myself of all the reasons they might not have reached out yet. By noon, I started checking my phone a little more often. I'd even charged it fully, just in case they tried calling. And I missed it. Funny, isn't it? How even grown-ups, old ones like me, still hold on to that childlike hope of being remembered. I made myself a little lunch, tuna sandwich and a few chips, and sat at the table pretending to scroll through Facebook. That's when I saw it. My daughter had posted a picture. "Family lunch day," it said. There they were. My daughter, her husband, and my 2 grandkids, sitting in a nice restaurant, smiling, plates full of food, the kind of lunch I used to plan for all of us. And there I was, sitting alone at my kitchen table, eating a tuna sandwich. For a moment, I just stared at the picture. Then, before I could stop myself, I laughed. Not the happy kind, but that strange little laugh that happens when something hurts too much to cry about. "Guess I didn't make the guest list this time," I whispered. That evening, I made myself a small dinner and tried to push it all out of my head. I watched some TV, a rerun of Golden Girls, I think. But every laugh track, every line about friendship, made my chest tighten. I looked over at the empty couch beside me and thought about all the times my house had been full of voices. Laughter, running feet, arguments over dessert. It had been a long time since the house sounded like that. The next day came and went the same way. No call, no message, no visit, just quiet. A few days later, I went grocery shopping, and that's where I met her, June. She was standing in front of the bread section, looking just as lost as I probably did. We both reached for the same loaf at the same time and laughed. She said, "Go ahead, sweetheart. I don't eat much anyway." Something about her voice made me smile. Warm, gentle, like someone who had stories to tell. We started chatting right there, between the bread and the milk aisle. She said she'd moved to town recently, lost her husband last winter, and her kids lived a few states away. I told her I was just running errands, trying to stay busy. She smiled and said, "That's what I tell myself too." Before I knew it, we'd spent 15 minutes talking about everything from prices going up to how hard it is to cook for one person. As I was about to leave, she asked, "Would you want to get coffee sometime? I don't know too many folks around here." I hesitated. I hadn't been out for coffee with someone in months, maybe years, but I said yes. The next morning, we met at a little cafe near the park. She waved when she saw me like she'd known me forever. And something about that simple wave, it made me feel seen again. We sat for hours, talking about our families, the old days, things we missed. She told me her daughter barely called anymore, and I told her mine forgot my birthday. We laughed at the sadness of it all. 2 women trying to make sense of being invisible. At one point, she said, "You know, maybe family isn't just blood. Maybe it's whoever remembers you exist." I looked at her and felt something loosen in my chest. We started meeting every week, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the park. We'd bring sandwiches and feed the ducks. She'd always bring an extra cookie, just in case, she said. And even though she pretended it was for herself, she always ended up giving it to me. The holidays came faster than I expected. The stores filled up with decorations. Christmas songs played everywhere. And suddenly, the world was covered in red and green. I started feeling that ache again. The one that comes with knowing your family has their plans, their dinners, their photos, and you're not in any of them. But then June called me one afternoon. "Hey, I'm having a few neighbors over for Christmas dinner. Nothing fancy, just food, music, and company. You better come. No excuses." I tried to say I didn't want to intrude, but she cut me off. "You're not intruding. You're invited." That word, invited, felt heavier than I thought it would. So on Christmas Eve, I put on my nicest sweater, brushed my hair, and even put on some lipstick. The same shade my late husband used to say he liked. When I walked into June's house, it was warm, filled with soft lights and the smell of something baking. People were laughing, passing plates, singing along to an old Bing Crosby record. And when June saw me, she said, "There she is, the guest of honor." Everyone clapped, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel forgotten. That night, sitting around her small dining table, surrounded by people I'd just met, people who asked about my life, who listened, who cared, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. Later, when I walked home through the quiet, snowy street, I stopped under a streetlight and looked up at the sky. Snowflakes were falling slowly, soft and bright against the dark. I whispered, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure who I was thanking. Maybe June. Maybe the universe. Maybe both. It's funny, isn't it? You can spend so long waiting for your family to remember you. And then one day, you realize there's a world full of people waiting to see you. If you just look up, I still love my family. I always will. I still hope maybe next year there'll be a call, or a visit, or a picture where I'm in it again. But until then, I'm not sitting by the window waiting. I've got friends to see, coffee to drink, stories to tell. And when I walk through the park with June, we wave to the other regulars, and sometimes I think, maybe family isn't something you lose. Maybe it's something you keep finding, one kind soul at a time. A few weeks after Christmas, the house didn't feel so cold anymore. Maybe it was because I had someone to call now, someone to laugh with about little things that didn't seem worth laughing about before. I started looking forward to Tuesdays. That was our coffee day, mine and June's. We'd sit by the window of that same little cafe, the one with chipped tables and mismatched chairs, and watch people pass by. Sometimes she'd bring her knitting, and I'd tease her about being faster than the cashiers. She'd grin and say, "That's because I've had a lifetime of practice doing things nobody notices." And I'd laugh, because I understood exactly what she meant. One morning, she showed up wearing this big red scarf that looked like it could wrap around her 3 times. "My daughter sent it," she said, half smiling. First thing she sent me in 2 years. No note, just the scarf. She shrugged, but her eyes had that same familiar ache I'd seen in my own reflection too many times. "Maybe it's her way of saying she's sorry," I said softly. "Maybe," she replied. "Or maybe it's just her way of saying she remembered. And sometimes, that's enough." That night her words stayed with me. I sat in bed, looking through old photo albums. Pictures of birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, beach trips. I used to be in all of them. Then slowly, I wasn't. First, I was behind the camera. Then, not even in the room. The next morning, I decided to call my daughter. It took me 15 minutes to build up the courage, pacing back and forth with my phone in my hand. When she answered, her voice sounded rushed, distracted. "Hey, Mom! Everything okay? I just wanted to check in," I said, trying to sound casual. "Haven't heard from you in a while." "Oh yeah," she said. "Things have been crazy here. You know, with the kids' schedules and work. Time just gets away from me." "I saw the pictures," I said quietly. "Looked like a nice family lunch." There was a pause. Then a soft sigh. "Mom, it's not that we didn't want to invite you. It's just, The restaurant was loud, and with your hearing, my hearing's fine." I interrupted. "You just didn't think I'd fit in anymore." Her silence said more than her words could have. "Mom, that's not fair," she finally said. "We just thought you'd prefer a quiet day. You always say you don't like crowds." I said, "I don't like being ignored," I whispered, before realizing I'd said it out loud. We both went quiet again. Then she said she had to go. Something about picking up the kids. And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. I don't know how long I stood like that, but it felt like time stopped for a while. When I saw June the next day, she took one look at me and said, "You called her, didn't you?" I nodded. "And she let you down again?" Another nod. She sighed, reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "You know, sometimes it's not that they don't love us. It's just that they forget how to show it. But that doesn't mean you stop living." We sat quietly for a moment and then she smiled. "Come with me this weekend. I want to show you something." Saturday came and she picked me up in her old car. One of those models that rumbles like it's laughing. We drove for about an hour until we reached a community center on the edge of town. It was small, with a faded sign that read, Maple Grove Outreach. Inside there were tables set up with crafts, puzzles, and coffee pots brewing in the corner. "What is this place?" I asked. "It's where I volunteer," she said. "We do meals for seniors, help with errands, and mostly just talk. Some of these folks don't have anyone left. Thought maybe you'd like to come." At first, I felt awkward. Everyone there seemed to know each other. A few old men playing cards, 2 women knitting by the window, a cheerful lady named Carol making cookies. But within minutes, they welcomed me like I'd been coming for years. By the end of the day, I was laughing more than I had in months. I helped Carol frost cookies, listened to stories from a man who swore he once met Elvis, and even sang along when someone started playing "You Are My Sunshine" on the piano. On the way home, June said, "See? You're one of us now. No one forgets you here." And she was right. Every week after that, I started helping at the center, greeting people, pouring coffee, sometimes just listening. There was something healing about it, being surrounded by others who knew what loneliness felt like, but chose to fight it with kindness anyway. One afternoon, as we were packing up, June said, "You know, for people who've been forgotten, we sure have a lot to give." I smiled and said, "Maybe that's what makes us special. We remember what it feels like to be unseen." That night, I wrote a letter to my daughter, not to scold her, not to make her feel guilty, just to tell her I loved her. I wrote about how proud I was of her, how much I missed the kids, and how I hoped we could find our way back to each other someday. I didn't even expect her to reply. I just needed to say it. A week later, a card came in the mail. Inside was a photo. My daughter and the kids, standing in front of their Christmas tree. The note said, "We miss you too, Mom. Let's talk soon." It wasn't much, but it was something. June grinned when I told her. "See? Sometimes love takes the long way round." Life started to feel lighter again. The days didn't blur together like they used to. I had purpose, laughter, and someone to share it all with. One day, while we were walking in the park, June stopped and said, "You know what's funny? I think we both thought we were invisible. But here we are, 2 ghosts who found each other and turned human again." I laughed so hard I almost cried, because she was right. And even though my family still didn't visit as much as I wished they would, I wasn't waiting anymore. I had something they couldn't take away. A life still full of moments that mattered. It was early spring when things began to change again. The air smelled faintly of rain and lilacs, and the trees outside my window started to bloom. Everything around me seemed to be waking up. Except June. She started missing our coffee mornings. At first, she'd just called to say she wasn't feeling well, that she was a little tired. I didn't think much of it. We all have those days. But then the calls stopped altogether. I went by her house one afternoon with some soup and a small plant I'd picked up. A tiny daffodil, because she'd once told me yellow flowers made her feel like sunshine, lived in her kitchen. Her neighbor, a young man with kind eyes, answered the door. He told me she'd been taken to the hospital a few days earlier. Pneumonia, he said softly. He gave me the room number, and I went straight there. When I walked into that hospital room, June was sitting up in bed, pale but smiling. "Well, look who it is," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Where else would I be?" I said, setting the daffodil on the little table beside her. "You can't get rid of me that easily," she chuckled, coughed a little, then said, "You always bring the sunshine with you. You know that?" For the next hour, we talked about everything and nothing. The coffee shop, the people at Maple Grove, the silly crossword puzzles we used to compete over. But behind all the small talk, I could feel something heavier hanging between us, unspoken but real. After a while, she looked out the window and said, "Funny thing about getting older, you start to measure time differently. Not by days or weeks, but by moments that still feel alive inside you." I nodded, fighting back tears. "And some people," I said softly, "make those moments brighter just by being in them." She turned back to me and smiled a little wistfully. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise you'll keep going, even if I can't. Promise you won't crawl back into that quiet shell you were in when I met you." I tried to joke. "Don't start talking like that. You'll be back at the cafe stealing my sugar packets in no time." But she just smiled again, that small, knowing smile of hers. "Just promise me, okay?" "I promise," I whispered. A week later, she was gone. The day of her funeral, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind that looks like it might break open any second. The service was small, just a few friends from the community center, her neighbor and me. They asked if anyone wanted to speak, and somehow my legs carried me to the front. I don't remember every word I said, but I remember the feeling. My voice shaking, my heart aching, my hands trembling as I told them what she had done for me, how she found me when I didn't even realize I was lost, how she reminded me that being seen doesn't always mean being loved by your own blood. Sometimes it's about being understood by a stranger who decides you matter. After the service, I went home and sat on the porch. The house felt unbearably quiet again. I made myself a cup of tea, opened the curtains, and stared out at the blooming daffodils in my little garden. That night, I dreamed of June. We were back at the cafe, laughing like we always did. She was wearing her big red scarf again. Before I woke up, she leaned in and whispered, "You're not alone. Don't forget that." I woke up crying, but it wasn't the kind of cry that breaks you. It was the kind that washes something clean inside you. After that, I threw myself into volunteering at Maple Grove more than ever. I started leading the morning group, helping new people settle in. Every time I saw someone sitting alone, staring at their hands the way I used to, I'd walk right up and sit beside them. I'd ask their name, tell them mine, and somehow, by the end of the day, we'd be laughing. One woman, Eleanor, reminded me so much of myself that it almost hurt. She was quiet, reserved, always apologizing for taking up space. One afternoon she said, "You're always so cheerful. Don't you ever get lonely?" I smiled. I used to. But then I realized loneliness doesn't disappear when people come back. It disappears when you start showing up for yourself. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "I think I'd like to learn how to do that night." I sat by my window and thought about how life had changed. My family still didn't visit often. My daughter would call every few weeks. Short calls, full of polite words and empty pauses. But I'd stopped waiting for her to fill the silence. I started baking again. I painted my living room. I even joined a small choir that sang at nursing homes. I found new ways to exist, to feel useful, to matter. And maybe that's what June meant when she said to keep going. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting the pain or pretending it didn't happen. Maybe it was about carrying it with grace, letting it shape you, not shrink you. One evening, after choir practice, I got a call from my grandson. He was 16 now, his voice deeper, more confident. "Grandma," he said, "I'm doing a school project about people who inspire us. I picked you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Me?" I said finally. "Yeah," he said. "You always seem happy. Mom says you've been through a lot, but you still keep going. I think that's brave." I didn't cry then. Not until after the call ended. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone to my chest, whispering a quiet thank you to June. Because somehow, she had taught me to be the kind of woman my grandson could look up to. The next week, he came to visit me, all on his own. We baked cookies, watched old movies, and talked until it was dark outside. When he hugged me goodbye, he said, "I'm gonna come again next weekend, okay?" And for the first time in years, I believed him. That night, I turned off all the lights and sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill over my little garden. I could almost hear June's laugh carried in the wind. I whispered, "You were right, my friend. I'm not alone." A few months passed and summer rolled in quietly. The air grew thick and warm, and the nights came slower, with long streaks of orange light stretching across the sky. I spent most evenings sitting on my porch with a glass of lemonade, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes up and down the street. Their laughter would echo through the air, soft and familiar, and sometimes I'd close my eyes and pretend I was back in the old house, the one where my kids used to play until the streetlights came on. It was strange how life could feel both full and empty at the same time. I had people now, friends at Maple Grove, neighbors who waved when they passed by, my grandson who called me every Sunday. And yet, there was still a part of me that ached for the family I used to know, for the way things once were before distance crept in like a quiet fog. One Sunday afternoon, I was baking cookies when the phone rang. It was my daughter. Her voice sounded different this time. Softer, hesitant. "Mom," she said, "I was wondering if you'd like to come over next weekend. The kids have been asking about you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like my heart forgot how to beat. "Of course," I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd love that." When I hung up, I just stood there, my hands still dusted with flour, staring at the phone. It had been almost 2 years since she'd invited me over. That week passed slowly, every day carrying a small mix of nerves and excitement. I must have tried on a dozen different blouses before finally settling on a soft blue one that June once said brought out my eyes. When Saturday came, I baked a pie, apple cinnamon, the same kind I used to make every Thanksgiving. I wrapped it in foil, grabbed my purse, and drove across town. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. When I pulled up to my daughter's house, the driveway was full. I almost turned back thinking maybe it was some big gathering, that maybe I'd misunderstood. But before I could start the car again, the front door opened, and there she was. My daughter, standing on the porch, smiling. She walked toward me and said, "You made it." I smiled back, though my throat was tight. Wouldn't miss it. Inside, the house looked the same as I remembered. Tidy, warm, filled with the smell of candles and roast chicken. The kids were older now. My granddaughter ran up to me, arms wide open. "Grandma, you came." That hug, that simple hug, felt like a piece of my heart stitched itself back together. We sat at the table and talked, awkward at first, but slowly the conversation began to flow. My son-in-law asked about my garden. My daughter complimented the pie. And for a few hours, it almost felt like old times. After dinner, my daughter and I stepped outside. The sun had dipped low, and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass. She hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said finally. "I know I haven't been there like I should have been. Things got busy and I don't know. I thought you were fine." I nodded slowly, my eyes on the fading light. "I was fine," I said, "but being fine isn't the same as being okay." She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't deserve that, none of it." For a long moment, we just stood there. Two women, mother and daughter, both a little broken in different ways. Then she reached out and took my hand. "I don't want things to stay this way," she said. "I want us to do better." Tears welled in my eyes, but I smiled through them. "Then let's start now," I said. And just like that, something small and beautiful began to heal between us. Over the next few weeks, I started visiting more often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for coffee. My grandson would mow my lawn. My granddaughter would draw me pictures. And slowly, their house started to feel like home again. Not in the same way it used to, but in a gentler, quieter way. One evening, my daughter showed me a photo album she'd been making. There were pictures of birthdays, vacations, holidays, and there, tucked between the pages, was a photo of me, taken years ago, before everything fell apart. "I found this in an old box," she said softly. "I didn't realize how long it's been since we took pictures together." I traced my fingers over the photo. "We'll take new ones," I said. She smiled. "I'd like that." For the first time in years, I felt peace settle in my chest. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing you've survived the storms and are finally standing in the sunlight again. That night, when I got home, I sat in my favorite chair, turned on the lamp beside me, and wrote a small note in my journal. "Today," I wrote, "I felt seen by my family again, but I'll never forget the strangers who reminded me I was worth seeing in the first place." I closed the journal, whispered a quiet thank you to June, and looked out the window. The world felt wide again, full of people, full of chances, full of second beginnings. Maybe that's what love really is. Not the kind that never breaks, but the kind that learns how to rebuild. A few weeks later, something small happened that meant the world to me. It was a quiet Sunday morning. One of those lazy ones where the sun pours through the curtains and the house feels calm. I was sitting in my kitchen reading the paper when there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw my daughter standing there holding a box. "Morning, Mom," she said with a shy smile. I smiled back, surprised. "Well, this is a nice surprise. What brings you here?" She lifted the box a little. "We made something for you." Inside the box was a framed photo, a big one, of my whole family, my daughter, my son-in-law, the kids, and me. All of us together, smiling in the backyard, my granddaughter sitting on my lap. For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and my eyes filled with tears. I traced my finger across the glass, stopping where my granddaughter's little hand was resting on mine. "I thought you might want to hang it here," my daughter said softly. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "Right here." She helped me hang it above the fireplace, the spot that had been empty for so long. We stood there for a while, looking at it. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I turned, she said, "You know, I didn't realize how much I missed seeing you smile." I laughed a little through the tears. I didn't realize how much I missed smiling. After she left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in my favorite chair. The house felt warmer that day, not because of the sunlight, but because of something inside me that had finally settled. I looked around at my small living room, the photos, the plants, the stack of letters from friends at Maple Grove, and I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the same woman who once sat at her kitchen table, crying over forgotten birthdays and unanswered calls. I wasn't just a mother who had been left behind. I was a woman who had learned how to keep loving, even when love didn't come back the way I expected. You see, loneliness has a way of changing you. It teaches you to listen to the quiet, to find beauty in small moments, to open your heart to strangers who show you kindness when your own family forgets. And forgiveness, that's its own kind of freedom. I didn't forgive because they asked me to. I forgave because holding on to bitterness was only hurting me. One evening, I decided to host a little get-together. Nothing big, just coffee and pie. I invited my daughter, her family, and even a couple of my new friends from the retirement community. I wasn't sure if everyone would come, but they did. We laughed, told stories, played cards, and for a while I just watched. Really watched the people around me. I realized that love doesn't always look the way it used to. Sometimes it grows back differently. Sometimes it surprises you. Before the night ended, my granddaughter leaned close and whispered, "Grandma, you're my favorite person." That one sentence, it undid me. After everyone left, I sat by the fire again, the new photo hanging above me, and thought about the way life works. How even after everything, the hurt, the silence, the long days of being forgotten, somehow, life still finds a way to give you back what you thought you lost. It might not come in the same wrapping or from the same people, but it comes. It really does. Now every time I walk past that photo, I smile, because it reminds me of two things. That pain doesn't have to be permanent, and that being forgotten once doesn't mean you'll never be remembered again. To anyone listening right now, maybe you felt what I felt. Maybe you've been left out, ignored, or made to feel small by the people you love most. But please, don't let that make you close your heart, because sometimes the most beautiful parts of your life start right after you think it's over. So keep your heart open. Keep hoping. You never know when kindness will find you again. Maybe from family, maybe from strangers, maybe from life itself. And if you've been watching this far, thank you for being here with me. You've made me feel seen too. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. It means more than you know. Because every time you do, it reminds someone out there that they are not alone. Thank you for listening.